Okay, going back to the very beginning when I mentioned that, I switched it up here, this little mini version of the old picture, I said it was an apple, and it's just phonetics. You can see that this isn't a very good picture of it, but it looks like an apple. You can kind of see the core of the apple, and it's a cross section of an apple cut in half, but it's just phonetics for a bull, apple, a bull, which is also Apollo. It's all a play on the same phonetics. And now I'm going to sort of get into looking at just the word Taurus mostly, but first I'll mention that the Taurus is where we get the word red. This is rust, rose, and then hyperboloid is where we get blue, hyperboloid, and it's also the bull. The Taurus and the bull represent sort of the blue and red aspects of the light spectrum. Now, before I get into looking at all these words, one thing I want to talk about in this phonetics, there's aspects to words, and anybody who's really gotten into studying linguistics is familiar with the idea of, percussive consonants and liquid consonants, and, there's qualities to the sounds that have been sort of defined in, although they just sort of do have their own natural definitions. The T is a percussive sound. You can't hold a T as a t t t t t t. And L is a liquid L, R, and that gets built into all this language stuff. And for the most part, when you're playing with phonetics, consonants remain. You can switch out percussive consonants for others. So this could be a D, d d d d d. But vowels can kind of just get rearranged any way they need to. The vowels are pretty loosey-goosey as far as the way words have been transferred from language to language, and the phonetics have been, even within our own language, it's hard to explain what's an E sound, because an E can mean any number of different things, as with all the other vowels. They're very interchangeable with the way they work. So don't get too hung up on if some of these don't look right. It's the sound, it's the phonetics. But so let's go to, just go through these words. Taurus. Taurus in astrology is the fixed earth sign of astrology. And it's again, this is the Taurus field, and that's that inertial plane. And anybody who knows a Taurus, like a Taurus sun or somebody with a lot of Taurian energy in their astrology chart, they're the picture of inertia. When they're at rest, they're very at rest. A Taurus might be difficult to get off the couch, but when a Taurus is working and in motion, and that inertia is being built into motion, and now it's an inertia of an object in motion tends to stay at motion. The Taurus is the hardest worker and can just stick, can work 16 hours straight hard. That same character that you couldn't get off the couch winds up outworking you. That's the nature. It's that dual nature of dielectricity. Once the static electricity has been sparked by some magnetism, you light a spark in the Taurus, and you suddenly create a momentum and the inertia that comes with that. So going on, tarot. This is just the wheel of life. Torah. This is going back to the idea that this is all religions and all, mysticisms, all the ancient schools of, Sufism and, the Kabbalistic traditions. It's all sciences of light and information, which is what all of this is. Rotary, it's the turning wheel. A couple of these words aren't necessarily with the same letters or even phonetics necessarily, but they start with this tor beginning, torque. And we'll get into that k sound too, is very related to this point too on a different level. But for now, we'll stick with the Taurus and the tor. But yeah, this is power, this is torque. Torrent, this is motion. This is tornado again, and then torsion. All those sort of creation of power, generation of power words right there. Stature. You know, how strong is this whole structure really? But yeah, how, especially considering that point, this is that like I was saying, it's like a gyroscope holding its rigidity in space. If it's in an incoherent field, its stature is a little bit flexible. If it's in a coherent field, it's got a stature that is pretty inflexible and strong. Has a lot of fortitude to that stature, depending on the coherency of the field that this particular atom is within. Now to orate is to, you know, to speak, and again, this is creating vibrations, create vibrations with our speech, and getting back into all of this. You know, like I said, this is an apple. This is Adam's apple. You know, it's your Adam's apple that creates the vibrations and, you know, the sounds that create sort of the world around us by the way we speak. To race, you know, this is the race. Stories, you know, that one is that's everything that comes along with all of the syncretism and the religious stories and the mythologies and the nursery rhymes and the fairy tales. It's all the stories of the Taurus. And yeah, that's the big one, I think. You know, that's how we learn about all this, is through those stories. It seems strange, but once you start understanding the metaphors for the stories, you start seeing that it's science. Those stories are the science of the transcendental source. Science that unfortunately we've been ignoring for a long time. But yeah, the way back to the source is all built into all those stories, and the way to understand all that is just, it's sitting in every single book you have, waiting to be understood. Now let's go artist. You know, this is the creative process, the whole thing. Recite. You know, this is like knowing something by heart. This is your heart chakra. You're able to recite it over and over again. Reset. Things get reset here. Things restart here. Easter. This is the sun's path through the year. This is the spring equinox in Aries. This is when Easter happens. Right here at the center of the Taurus again. Astro. You know, stars, light. Again. Arrest. You know, you're arrested to this sine wave. You know, there's freedom, but you're also there's a trap to it, I guess, in a way. There's limits to the capacitance of each field. Rooster. Not only is this sort of the spring equinox, but it also represents 6 a.m. You know, noon, 6 p.m. and midnight. And this is 6 a.m. is when the rooster crows to roust us out of our sleep. This is the sleeping hours. Rites. This is a rites of passage happen through here. Satori. This is, you know, sort of spiritual oneness. Ishtar and Sister are both sort of related to Isis star. And they both sort of relate to the feminine aspect of the magnetic pulse of that, you know, the dielectric point of inertia that creates the Taurus field in the first place. And then also the other feminine aspect of that is the uterus. You know, we all come from a uterus. And the word trust. How do you trust that this is all going to continue and the summer's going to come back again? Trace. Can you trace back to your roots here? Can you trace the path ahead, the path behind? Trees. You know, this is the earth. This is where trees come up, and this is where the roots go down. Ouster. That's sort of similar to getting the Taurus off the couch. You got to ouster that magnetic pulse can ouster the Taurus. Stutter, you know, that stutter point happens right there, and that pulse. You know, the more frequent the pulse, the stutter. Traits, you know, what are reoccurring features that happen over and over again? Those become traits. Roots, you know, again, back to where do you come from? Where are your roots? Rates, how fast do you come back around here again? Rotisserie, you know, this is kind of getting into ether. We'll start talking about how this heat comes from this point, but this is kind of a rotisserie going around and around. And restore, you know, everything gets restored here. It's brand new life, the life cup of salvation again when the sun exalts in Aries. In these words, I hope you guys come up with a bunch more. But yeah, there are a lot more. Yeah, and just looking at the word ether, you know, again, it represents that pulse, and it's just an anagram for Earth, which is an anagram for heart, you know, and it's an interesting thing. Oops, that's not what I meant to write there. It's supposed to be heat. We don't really think about it too much, but our bodies have this heat. We generate heat. Where does that heat come from? You know, yeah, eating food, burning calories, but where does that heat come from? You know, it comes from the ether, it comes from the heart, the hearth, the heat. And that's all also connected with the art. You know, this is creation. And yeah, there's so much more that goes into the words, getting into that, but as far as the, you know, the bull of Taurus in the field, that's kind of the beginning of just looking at how one word, they all seem like different words, but when you start looking at it in this kind of a context, you start seeing how all those words are, yeah, they are related now that you look at it like that. And that goes on in my future videos. We'll look, you know, more in depth into individual words and individual aspects of syncretism and how it's just everywhere. And it's really fun to start noticing. I don't know, I feel like life got way less boring. And I've never been a bored person. I felt like I've always had plenty to think about and chew on. But yeah, starting to discover this code in the language and syncretism as a whole has blown the doors wide open, and life is just mind candy for me now on every level, especially the language. Really, really fascinated. So yeah, if you're interested in all this stuff too, stick with me, because yeah, I'm going to keep my focus all in this sort of language direction for a while. So yeah, thanks for sticking with me all the way through this. Yeah, I hope some of this made some sense, and I hope that I was able to get across what I was trying to get across, and that you're able to at least begin to see what I see in this model. And I know it's a little difficult if astrology is something that's new to you. If astrology is not new to you, then I know you're jumping all over this and you get it. There feels like a leap of faith when there's this divide between you and your understanding of astrology. If you haven't watched it play out, it's just a theory that people believe in. Until you watch it play out over and over and over again, it will always just be that. And that's kind of the catch-22 of all of this. All of this is a belief system until you watch astrology play out firsthand for yourself. Then everything starts clicking, and you know, all those synapses start firing, and all sorts of things start connecting again. That it's always been there. All those connections are always there, waiting to be reconnected energetically with light and information. So hopefully I've provided enough information to start making some of those connections happen again. And yeah, stick with me and we'll get further into all this. Thanks everybody, and catch you next time. Peace.